The pen scratched across paper, each stroke severing 5 years of marriage with casual indifference. Natalie watched Brandon sign his name with a flourish, like he was autographing something valuable instead of destroying what they'd built together. His mother, Patricia, stood behind him, arms crossed, smile stretching wide across her face. His sister Candace held up her phone, recording the whole scene for whatever audience she'd curated online. And there, pressed against Brandon's left side on the leather couch, sat Amber in a tight red dress, her hand possessively on his thigh. "Finally," Patricia said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "We can stop pretending you belonged in this family." Natalie's fingers tightened around her own pen, but her face remained smooth, expressionless. She'd learned years ago that showing emotion around these people was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. They'd circle and attack, feeding on any vulnerability. Brandon slid the papers across the coffee table toward her. "Your turn, Nat, unless you're having second thoughts about giving up all this?" He gestured around the living room of the house they'd shared, the mortgage she'd helped pay while working double shifts at the retail store. The furniture she'd carefully selected from discount outlets. The photographs she'd framed, most of which had already been taken down and replaced with pictures of Brandon and Amber at various restaurants and weekend trips. Candace zoomed in with her phone. "Make sure you get her face when she realizes what she's losing." "Oh, I'm getting everything," Candace said, grinning. "This is going to get so many views." Natalie picked up the pen. She'd already read the papers 3 times, reviewed them with the modest attorney she could afford. Brandon's lawyer had been expensive, aggressive, and thorough. She was getting nothing. Not the house, not the car, not even half of the savings account she'd contributed to more than Brandon had during the first 3 years of their marriage when he'd been finding himself between jobs. "Can we hurry this up?" Amber said, examining her manicured nails. "We have dinner reservations at 7. Patricia laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Amber, darling, you have more class in your little finger than this one ever had in her whole body." "Mom, please," Brandon said, but his tone was amused, not defensive. "Let's just get this done." Natalie signed. First page. Second page. Third. Each signature felt like shedding dead skin, painful but necessary. She was walking away from everything material, but she was taking something they couldn't quantify or understand. Her freedom from their contempt. "I still can't believe you thought you were good enough for my son," Patricia continued, unable to help herself. "A retail worker. No education beyond high school. No family worth mentioning. Brandon could have had anyone and we got stuck with you for 5 years. 5 years too long," Candace added, still filming. Natalie finished the last signature and set down the pen. She looked up at Brandon, really looked at him for the first time in months. The man she'd fallen in love with at 22 had been kind once, or at least she'd believed he was. He talked about building a life together, about partnership and shared dreams. That man had dissolved slowly, replaced by someone who found her embarrassing, who criticized her clothes, her job, her opinions, until she'd stopped sharing any of them. "We're done then," Natalie said quietly. "We're done," Brandon confirmed. He gathered the papers, tapping them against the table to align them neatly. "My lawyer will file these Monday morning. You've got until the end of the month to get your stuff out." 2 weeks, Natalie said. "I'll be out in 2 weeks." "Take your time," Amber said sweetly. "Actually, don't. We're redecorating." Natalie stood, smoothing her simple green dress. She'd worn it deliberately, one of the few nice things she owned that Patricia hadn't criticized the first time she'd seen it. Small victories. "Before you go," Patricia said, stepping closer, "I just want you to know that we're all relieved. You were a weight around Brandon's neck. Now he can finally become the man he was meant to be. With a woman who deserves him." Amber preened. Natalie picked up her purse from the chair. "I hope you all get exactly what you deserve." She meant it in ways they couldn't understand. Not as a curse but as a simple truth. She walked toward the door, her footsteps steady on the hardwood floor she'd once mopped every Saturday morning while Brandon slept until noon. "That's it," Candace called after her. "No tears? No begging?" Natalie paused at the door, her hand on the knob. She could have said so many things. She could have told them about the time she'd covered Brandon's half of the rent when his investments failed. About the credit card debt she'd paid off that he'd racked up on clothes and gadgets. About the nights she'd worked closing shifts at the store and come home to find him and Amber having drinks in their living room, both of them pretending there was an innocent explanation. But she said nothing. She opened the door and stepped out into the cool evening air. Behind her, she heard Patricia say, "Good riddance to bad rubbish." Laughter followed, and then the door closed, cutting off the sound. Natalie walked to her aging sedan, the one Brandon had always been embarrassed to be seen in. She got inside, started the engine, and sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough over the past 6 months, since she'd first discovered the affair. Since Brandon had stopped even pretending to care about her feelings. Since his family had started treating her like a servant rather than a daughter-in-law. She pulled out her phone and looked at the contact she'd ignored for 3 years. Dad. She changed it from father to dad, when she'd first gotten engaged, back when she'd believed love and determination were enough to build a life. Back when she'd been naive enough to think walking away from her family's wealth would prove something meaningful. Her thumb hovered over the name. Gerald Thornton. One call would change everything, but she'd been so determined to make it on her own, to prove she didn't need the money or the name or the power that came with being a Thornton. She'd wanted authenticity, real relationships built on who she was, not what she had. She'd gotten her answer. Brandon had loved what he thought she was, not who she actually was. And when she'd proven to be less than his ambitions, he'd discarded her without hesitation. Natalie closed the phone and set it in the cup holder. Not yet. She'd handle this herself a little longer. She drove away from the house, watching it shrink in her rearview mirror. Inside, they were probably celebrating, opening expensive wine, toasting their victory. They had no idea who she really was. They'd never asked about her family, never questioned why she never talked about her childhood or her parents. They'd simply assumed she came from nothing because she'd presented herself as ordinary. The assumption had suited her purposes then. Felt different now. Natalie drove through the city streets, past the neighborhoods she'd once dreamed of living in with Brandon, past the restaurant where he'd proposed, past the store where she'd worked her way up from sales associate to assistant manager. She drove until she reached the modest apartment complex on the east side, where she'd already signed a lease on a small one-bedroom unit. Her new beginning. Humble, quiet, and entirely hers. She parked and sat in the gathering darkness, watching the windows of the complex light up as people came home from work. Normal people with normal lives, untouched by the kind of wealth that could corrupt and isolate. Tomorrow she'd start moving her belongings. Next week she'd begin her new life. But tonight, sitting alone in her car, Natalie allowed herself one moment of absolute clarity. She was done hiding. Done pretending. Done making herself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for her. Brandon and his family thought they'd won. They'd gotten rid of the burden, the embarrassment, the unsuitable wife. They had no idea what they'd actually done. They'd set her free. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and someone else's cooking. Natalie set down the last box, her arms aching from 3 trips up the narrow staircase. The furniture she'd taken from the house consisted of a bed, a small dresser, and a reading chair Brandon had called garage sale trash, despite her having paid $200 for it at an estate sale. Everything else she'd left behind, unwilling to fight for things that held only bitter memories. Her phone buzzed. A text from her manager at the bookstore. "Can you cover the afternoon shift tomorrow?" Rachel called in sick. Natalie responded quickly. "Yes, I'll be there at noon." The bookstore job had been her second employment, something she'd taken on 3 months ago when Brandon's criticism of her retail career had become unbearable. He'd wanted her to quit working entirely, to focus on supporting his career, by attending his networking events and hosting dinners for his business school friends. But quitting would have meant financial dependence, and some instinct had told her to maintain her own income. That instinct had saved her. She unpacked the essentials, setting up her small kitchen with mismatched dishes and the coffee maker she'd bought for herself last Christmas. The apartment had one window in the living area that faced east, promising morning light. The bedroom was barely large enough for her bed and dresser, but it was clean and it was hers. Natalie made tea in her new space, sitting in the reading chair and looking around at the bare walls. This was freedom. This was what she'd chosen when she'd walked away from the Thornton estate 8 years ago, determined to build a life without the weight of expectations and wealth. She thought back to that last conversation with her father before she'd left. "You're making a mistake," Gerald had said, standing in his office, the city skyline spread behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. "The world isn't kind to young women who have nothing." "I need to know who I am without all of this," Natalie had replied, gesturing at the opulence surrounding them. The imported rugs, the original artwork, the furniture that cost more than most people's cars. "You're a Thornton. That's who you are. That's what I have. It's not who I am." Her father had studied her with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. At 62 he'd been running Thornton Enterprises for 40 years, building it from a successful tech company into a global conglomerate worth billions. Trillions, according to some estimates, though the family kept their exact worth private, their holdings spread across so many subsidiaries and investments that even financial journalists gave up trying to calculate the total. If you walk out that door, Gerald had said slowly, I won't stop you. But I won't fund this experiment either. You want to know who you are without money? Then you'll actually be without it. I understand. Do you? Do you understand what it means to work for minimum wage? To worry about rent? To be invisible? That's what I'm trying to find out. He'd sighed, turning back to the window. Your mother would have talked you out of this. Her mother had died when Natalie was 15, a car accident that had shattered their family. Her younger brother Julian had been 12, suddenly shy and withdrawn. Her father had buried himself in work, and Natalie had felt like she was suffocating in the estate's empty rooms, surrounded by staff who treated her like porcelain and friends who only cared about her last name. Mom would have understood, Natalie had said. Gerald hadn't argued. He'd simply handed her an envelope. Take this. $3,000. It's yours. After that, you're on your own until you decide to come home. She'd taken the envelope and left that same afternoon. The $3,000 had lasted 6 months, paying for the security deposit on a shared apartment and basic expenses while she'd found her first job. She'd worked at a coffee shop, then a clothing store, then the retail position where she'd met Brandon. He'd come in looking for a gift for his mother, charming and a little lost in the women's section. Natalie had helped him pick out a scarf, and he'd asked for her number. Their first date had been coffee, their second dinner at a modest restaurant. He'd seemed kind, ambitious in a grounded way, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. She'd never told him about the Thornton name. She'd introduced herself as Natalie Harper, using her mother's maiden name. When he'd asked about her family, she'd been vague, distant, not close, not worth discussing. He'd accepted it without question, and she'd been grateful. For 3 years the relationship had been good. Then Brandon had gotten into business school and things had shifted. His friends were wealthier, more connected. He'd started comparing her to their girlfriends, women with degrees and family money and social media presences. He'd started suggesting she dress differently, talk differently, be different. Then had come Amber, introduced by one of his classmates. Amber worked in marketing, came from a solid middle-class family, and presented herself well at the networking events Brandon wanted to attend. She'd started appearing more and more frequently in their lives until Natalie had finally confronted Brandon about it. You're being paranoid, he'd said. She's just a friend. But friends didn't text at midnight. Friends didn't have inside jokes that excluded the girlfriend. Friends didn't look at someone the way Amber looked at Brandon. Natalie had tried talking to him, tried suggesting couples counseling, tried being the woman he seemed to want her to be. Nothing had worked. The distance had grown until one evening she'd come home early from work to find them on the couch, not quite touching but close enough that the intimacy was obvious. This isn't what it looks like, Brandon had said. But it was exactly what it looked like. The next 3 months had been a slow death of the relationship. Brandon had stopped pretending. He'd brought Amber to family dinners. He'd stopped wearing his wedding ring. And finally, he'd handed her the divorce papers with his lawyer's contact information. Natalie finished her tea and stood, moving to the window. The city stretched out below, lights beginning to twinkle as evening deepened. Somewhere out there, Brandon was probably having dinner with Amber, celebrating his freedom. His family was probably calling their friends, spreading the news that he'd finally gotten rid of his unsuitable wife. Let them celebrate. Natalie pulled out her phone again, looking at her father's contact. 3 years without speaking. 3 years of proving she could make it alone, even if the life she'd built had just collapsed. She wasn't ready to call yet. But soon. Soon she'd need to have that conversation. For tonight, though, she was simply Natalie Harper, newly divorced, living in a small apartment, working 2 retail jobs to make rent. Tomorrow she'd cover the shift at the bookstore. Next week she'd start looking for a better job, maybe something with benefits. She'd rebuild. Just like she'd built the first time when she'd walked away from everything. The difference was that this time she knew exactly how cruel the world could be. And that knowledge would make her stronger. 3 weeks into her new life, Natalie's phone rang at 6 in the morning. She fumbled for it in the darkness, heart pounding at the unusual hour. The screen showed unknown number, but something made her answer. Natalie Thornton? A woman's voice, professional and careful. Natalie sat up, suddenly awake. No one had called her by that name in 8 years. Who is this? My name is Dr. Rebecca Santos. I'm calling from Mercy General Hospital. Your father, Gerald Thornton, has listed you as his emergency contact. He's asked me to reach out to you. The room seemed to tilt. What happened? He's stable at the moment, but he's been diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer. He'd like to see you if you're willing. Natalie's hand tightened on the phone. How long has he known? Several months from what I understand. He's declined most aggressive treatments. Miss Thornton, I should be direct with you. His prognosis is measured in weeks, not months. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I'll be there today, Natalie said. Which room? Dr. Santos gave her the information, along with instructions for parking and visitor access. After they hung up, Natalie sat in bed, watching dawn light creep across her bedroom floor. Her father was dying. The man who'd raised her, who'd argued with her about leaving, who'd let her go anyway because he'd understood she needed to find herself, was dying alone in a hospital room. She called in sick to both jobs, threw on jeans and a blue sweater, and drove across the city to the hospital. The building was newer than she expected, all glass and modern architecture. She found parking and made her way inside, following the signs to the cardiac wing where the private rooms were located. The room number Dr. Santos had given her was at the end of a quiet hallway. Natalie paused outside the door, gathering herself. 8 years. 8 years since she'd seen her father or spoken to him. She'd kept track of him through internet searches, reading about Thornton Enterprises' continued expansion, seeing his picture at charity galas and business conferences. He'd aged in those photos, his hair going completely gray, but he'd looked strong and vital. She knocked softly and pushed the door open. The man in the hospital bed looked nothing like those photos. Gerald Thornton had lost at least 40 pounds, his frame almost skeletal under the hospital gown. His skin had a grayish tint, and tubes connected him to various monitors. But his eyes were the same, sharp and knowing, and they locked onto her the moment she entered. Natalie, he said, his voice rough but steady. Dad. The word caught in her throat. You came. Of course I came. She moved closer to the bed, unsure whether to sit or stand, whether to reach for his hand or keep her distance. Sit down, he said, nodding toward the chair beside the bed. We need to talk and I don't have the energy to crane my neck. She sat. Up close she could see the toll the illness had taken. His hands, once strong and steady, trembled slightly. The monitors beeped softly, marking his heartbeat, his oxygen levels, the slow decline of his body. How long have you been watching? Natalie asked quietly. A faint smile crossed his lips. The whole time. Did you really think I'd let you vanish completely? I respected your wish for independence, but I was never going to lose track of my daughter. You knew about Brandon. I knew you got married. I knew where you worked, where you lived. I knew when you took the second job at the bookstore. He paused, breathing carefully. I knew when he filed for divorce. You could have reached out. You asked me not to. You said you needed to do this alone. His eyes studied her face. But I'm dying now, so your wishes don't get to override mine anymore. The bluntness of it struck her silent. I called you here for several reasons, Gerald continued. The first is selfish. I wanted to see you before I go. The second is practical. You're my heir, Natalie. You and Julian. The estate, the company, everything I've built. Half of it is yours. I don't want it. Too bad. It's yours whether you want it or not. He shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. But I'm not just leaving you money. I'm leaving you responsibility. The Thornton name means something. The company employs 60,000 people globally. Our investments support medical research, education initiatives, environmental conservation. We're not just rich, Natalie. We're stewards. I walked away from that world. And you're welcome to walk away again. But not before you understand what you're walking away from. He reached for a folder on the bedside table, his movements slow and deliberate. This contains the basic financial overview. Assets, holdings, responsibilities. Julian has been preparing to take over operations, but he needs you. He was 12 when you left. Now he's 20 and he's been asking about you for years. Julian. Natalie's heart clenched. Her younger brother, quiet and serious even as a child. How is he? Smart. Focused. Lonely. Gerald handed her the folder. He took your leaving hard. He didn't understand why you had to go, and I couldn't explain it in a way that made sense to a 12-year-old. He thought you abandoned him. I didn't abandon him. I just needed to. I know. And he'll understand eventually. But you need to tell him yourself. Gerald leaned back against the pillows, exhausted by the conversation. He's in the cafeteria getting coffee. He's been here every day for the past week. He's here now. I told him you were coming. He wanted to give us time alone first, but he's anxious to see you. Natalie opened the folder with trembling hands. The first page showed a summary of assets. The numbers were staggering even though she'd grown up surrounded by wealth. Billions in real estate holdings. Trillions in tech investments. Controlling interests in 15 major corporations. Charitable foundations, trusts, endowments. This is too much, she whispered. It's reality. Your reality whether you lived in a mansion or a studio apartment. The money doesn't disappear because you ignore it. Why now? Why not wait until? She couldn't finish the sentence. Until I'm dead? Because I want to see you take it. I want to watch you step into who you're meant to be. His eyes burned with intensity despite his weakened state. You've spent 8 years proving you could survive without money. You did it. You proved your point. Now prove you can handle having it without losing yourself. A knock at the door interrupted them. Both turned as a young man entered, tall and lean with dark hair and their mother's gentle eyes. Julian had grown from a boy into a man in her absence, but she'd have recognized him anywhere. Natalie, he said, and his voice broke on her name. She stood, and he crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulling her into a fierce hug. He was taller than her now, broader, but he held her like she might disappear again if he let go. I missed you, he said into her hair. I missed you so much. I missed you too, Natalie replied, tears finally spilling over. Julian, I'm so sorry. Just don't leave again. Whatever happens next, don't leave again. She pulled back to look at him properly. He had their father's sharp intelligence in his eyes, their mother's kindness in his smile. I won't. I promise. Gerald watched them from the bed, satisfaction and sorrow mixing on his face. Good. Now that we've established that, let's get down to business. Natalie, you have 2 weeks to decide what you want to do with your inheritance. Julian will show you the operations, introduce you to key people, help you understand the scope of what we've built. After 2 weeks, I expect an answer. Are you in or are you out? And if I'm out? Then Julian inherits your share and you take a settlement. Enough to live comfortably but not enough to matter in the larger scheme of things. $50 million and a clean break. Julian looked stricken. Dad, you can't. I can and I will. Natalie needs to choose this life, not have it forced on her. If she doesn't want the responsibility, that's her right. But she needs to make an informed choice. Natalie looked between them, her father dying in his hospital bed, her brother desperate for her to stay. She thought about Brandon, probably waking up beside Amber right now, believing he'd traded up. She thought about Patricia and Candace celebrating their victory. She thought about the woman she'd been trying to be for 8 years, small and ordinary and invisible. That woman was gone. She died the moment Brandon had signed those divorce papers with a smile on his face. 2 weeks, Natalie said. Show me everything. Gerald smiled. That's my girl. The Thornton estate occupied 15 acres on the northern edge of the city, behind gates that opened only with biometric scanning and security clearance. Natalie had forgotten how imposing it was, the main house rising 4 stories of limestone and glass, the grounds manicured to perfection. Guest houses dotted the property, along with a pool, tennis courts, and gardens that required a full-time staff to maintain. Julian drove them through the gates in a sleek electric sedan. We've updated a lot since you left. Dad's been focused on sustainability the past few years. Solar panels, geothermal heating, water reclamation systems. It looks the same, Natalie said, watching the house approach. The bones are the same. The details are different. He parked in the circular drive, and staff members appeared immediately to open doors and offer assistance. Julian waved them off politely. We're good, thanks. Let us settle in. Inside, the house smelled like lemon polish and fresh flowers. The entry hall still featured the same grand staircase, the same chandelier their mother had chosen 20 years ago. But Julian was right about the details being different. The artwork had changed, featuring contemporary pieces alongside classical paintings. The furniture was modern, comfortable rather than formal. Dad moved his main office to the 2nd floor after his diagnosis, Julian explained, leading her upstairs. Easier for him to work from here than go into the corporate headquarters. Though he still goes in twice a week when he's feeling strong enough. They passed family portraits, including one of the 4 of them from before their mother's death. Natalie was 14 in the picture, Julian 11, both of them smiling and oblivious to the tragedy coming. The office took up a corner suite with views of the gardens and the city skyline beyond. Computers lined one wall, multiple monitors displaying stock tickers, news feeds and financial data. The desk was massive, covered in neat stacks of papers and files. "This is Command Central," Julian said. "Dad runs most of the strategic decisions from here. I've been handling daily operations for the past 6 months since he's been too weak to go in regularly." "Tell me about the company," Natalie said, settling into one of the leather chairs facing the desk. "The real story, not the official version." Julian pulled up a presentation on one of the monitors. Thornton Enterprises started as a software company in the 70s. Dad was one of the early innovators in data security and encryption. He made his first million before he was 30. But he was smart about diversification. He invested in other tech companies, bought real estate, moved into telecommunications when that exploded in the 90s. Charts and graphs appeared on the screen, showing exponential growth. "By the time I was born, we were worth about $50 billion. Now." Julian pulled up a current asset summary. "Conservative estimates put us at about $3 trillion. Most of that is in holdings that aren't publicly traded, which is why we don't show up on standard rich lists. Dad preferred privacy." $3 trillion. Natalie repeated the number, trying to comprehend it. "Your half is about $1.5 trillion, Julian said calmly. "Mine's the same. But it's not liquid cash sitting in a bank. It's spread across thousands of investments, properties, companies, bonds, trusts. You couldn't spend it all if you tried. The challenge is managing it responsibly." "What does responsibly mean?" "That's where it gets interesting." Julian switched to another presentation, this one showing various charitable initiatives and investment strategies. "Dad's philosophy has always been that wealth at this scale is a public trust. We invest in things that matter. Medical research, renewable energy, education, housing. We avoid weapons manufacturing, predatory lending, anything that causes measurable harm. We pay our employees well, provide good benefits, and we're audited annually by independent ethics boards." That doesn't sound like most billionaires. It's not. Most billionaires optimize for profit above everything else. Dad optimizes for impact. He wants the money to do good in the world, not just multiply for its own sake. Natalie studied the charts. Education programs in 12 countries. Medical research grants totaling billions. Affordable housing developments in 20 cities. Environmental conservation projects spanning 3 continents. "This is overwhelming," she admitted. "It is," Julian agreed. "That's why you have teams of people to help you. Investment managers, legal advisors, operations directors. You don't have to understand everything immediately. But you do need to understand the core principle. We're stewards, not owners. The money flows through us to create value in the world. What if I mess it up? Then you'll learn and do better next time. Dad's made mistakes too. The point is to keep trying, keep improving." Julian closed the presentations and turned to face her directly. "But here's the real question, Nat. Do you want this? Setting aside the money for a moment, do you want the responsibility? Because if you take it on, you're committing to something bigger than yourself. This isn't about buying fancy clothes or traveling first class. This is about decisions that affect thousands of people's lives." Natalie thought about her apartment, her bookstore job, the quiet life she'd built. That life had felt authentic, meaningful in its simplicity. But it had also been limited, reactive rather than proactive. She'd been surviving, not creating. "I need to see more," she said finally. "The operations, the people, the actual work being done." "Then that's what we'll do." Julian stood, offering his hand. "Starting tomorrow, I'll take you to the headquarters. You'll meet the executive team, tour the facilities, sit in on strategy meetings. By the end of 2 weeks, you'll have a complete picture. Then you can decide." They shook hands and Natalie felt the weight of it. Her little brother was asking her to step into a role she'd run from, to embrace a destiny she'd rejected. But he wasn't asking for himself. He was asking for their father, for their mother's memory, for the legacy they'd both inherited whether they wanted it or not. That night, Natalie stayed in her old bedroom. The staff had maintained it exactly as she'd left it, though everything was dust-free and freshly cleaned. Her teenage books still lined the shelves, her desk still held the laptop she'd used for high school papers. It was like stepping into a museum of her own past. She called her father at the hospital. "How are you feeling?" "Tired." "How's the house?" "The same but different. Julian's taking good care of things. He's been waiting for you to come back. He never said it directly but I could tell. He wanted his big sister. I should have visited sooner. You did what you needed to do. No regrets, Natalie. We don't have time for regrets." His breathing sounded labored over the phone. "Did Julian show you the numbers?" He showed me enough to terrify me. Gerald chuckled, which turned into a cough. Good. You should be a little terrified. Anyone who isn't terrified by that much responsibility is a fool. But terror means you understand the stakes. That's the first step. What if I can't do it? Then you'll fail and you'll learn and you'll try again. But I don't think you'll fail. You're more like me than you want to admit. Stubborn, independent, deeply moral. Those are the traits you need to navigate this world. Brandon used to say I was too naive. Too trusting. Brandon was an idiot who let the best thing in his life walk away because he was too blind to see her value. Gerald's voice hardened. You're better off without him, sweetheart. Trust me on that. I'm starting to realize that. Good. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow you start learning how to be a Thornton again. They said goodnight and Natalie hung up. She stood at her bedroom window, looking out over the estate grounds, lit by subtle landscape lighting. Beyond the gates, the city sprawled in every direction. Millions of people living their lives, unaware that decisions made in this house could affect their futures. Brandon was out there somewhere, probably sleeping soundly, believing he'd made the smart choice. His family was probably still congratulating themselves on getting rid of her. They had no idea what they'd thrown away. And Natalie was beginning to understand that their loss was her liberation. Not because of the money but because of what the money represented. The freedom to stop hiding, to stop making herself small, to step into the fullness of who she actually was. The girl who'd run away 8 years ago had been searching for authenticity, for proof that she was more than her last name. The woman standing at this window now understood that authenticity wasn't found by running away from who you were. It was found by owning it completely and using it with purpose. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to explore this world again, to understand the scope of what she'd inherit, to decide if she was strong enough to handle it. But deep down she already knew her answer. She'd survived Brandon's betrayal. She'd rebuilt from nothing once before. She could do this. She would do this. The Thornton Enterprises headquarters occupied a 40-story tower in the financial district, sleek and modern with the company logo subtle and understated on the facade. Julian brought Natalie in through the executive entrance on her third day home, bypassing the main lobby where employees were beginning their workday. I wanted to give you a few days to adjust before throwing you into the deep end, Julian explained as they rode the private elevator to the top floor. But Dad's insisting we accelerate the timeline. He's getting weaker. How long does he actually have? Dr. Santos says maybe 3 weeks. Maybe less. Julian's jaw tightened. He's refusing pain management because it makes him foggy, and he wants to stay sharp until the end. It's very him. The elevator opened directly into the executive suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic city views. The reception area was elegant but not ostentatious, with comfortable seating and artwork that probably cost more than most houses. Miss Thornton, the receptionist said, standing immediately. She was young, professional, with genuine warmth in her smile. It's wonderful to finally meet you. I'm Sophie Chin, executive assistant to Mr. Julian and your father. Natalie is fine, Natalie said, shaking her hand. Miss Thornton makes me feel ancient. I'm 28, Sophie said with a grin. Miss Thornton makes me feel ancient too. But the board members insist on formality, so I'll use it during official meetings if that's all right. That works. Julian led her deeper into the suite, pointing out offices and conference rooms. We've got the senior leadership team coming in at 9. They know you're coming home, though we've kept it quiet from the broader company until you're ready to be public about it. What exactly am I supposed to do at this meeting? Observe. Listen. Learn. They're going to present quarterly results and discuss strategic initiatives for the next fiscal year. You don't need to contribute yet, just get a sense of how we operate. They entered a large conference room where 5 people were already seated, reviewing documents. They all stood when Natalie entered. Julian made introductions. Everyone, this is my sister Natalie. She'll be joining us going forward. Natalie, this is our executive team. She shook hands with each of them. Robert Chin, Chief Financial Officer. Patricia Hughes, Chief Operations Officer. James Rodriguez, Chief Technology Officer. Angela Thompson, Chief Legal Counsel, and Michael Foster, Chief Strategy Officer. We're very glad to have you here, Robert said. He was in his 50s with graying hair and a kind face. Julian has spoken of you often. All good things, I hope, Natalie replied. The very best. The meeting lasted 3 hours. They discussed financial performance across various divisions, reviewed investment portfolios, debated potential acquisitions, and analyzed market trends. Natalie followed maybe half of it, taking notes and trying not to look overwhelmed. but certain things came through clearly. The team respected Julian's input, deferring to his judgment on technical matters while offering their own expertise freely. Decisions were made collaboratively, with genuine debate that never turned personal. And every decision was evaluated through the lens of impact as well as profit. The housing development in Austin is profitable, Angela said during one discussion, but the environmental report shows we'd be displacing a significant wetland habitat. I recommend we pass on this one despite the projected returns. Agreed, Julian said immediately. Michael, find us an alternative site that doesn't destroy critical habitat. Already working on it. This was repeated throughout the meeting. Potential investments were screened not just for financial viability but for ethical implications. It was capitalism, but capitalism with guardrails, with conscience. After the meeting adjourned, Robert approached Natalie. How are you feeling? That was a lot to absorb. Honestly? Overwhelmed, she admitted. I worked retail for the past 8 years. This is a different universe. You'll adapt faster than you think. And you have an advantage. What's that? You've lived without money. You understand what it means for ordinary people when we make decisions that affect housing costs or job availability or healthcare access. That perspective is valuable at this level, where it's easy to lose sight of real-world impact. His words struck deep. She'd never considered her retail experience as an asset, always viewed it as something to hide or overcome. But Robert was right. She'd lived on the other side, understood financial pressure and job insecurity in ways most executives never would. The rest of the week followed a similar pattern. Days at headquarters, learning operations, meeting department heads, touring facilities. Evenings at the estate, reviewing documents and asking Julian endless questions. And every night, a phone call with their father, who demanded detailed reports of what she'd learned and challenged her understanding. What did you think of the healthcare investment strategy? Gerald asked on Thursday night. I thought it was smart. Focusing on preventive care and mental health services rather than just pharmaceutical profits. It makes long-term sense both financially and socially. What would you change? The question caught her off guard. I don't know enough to change anything yet. Pretend you do. What's your instinct? Natalie considered. I'd want to see more investment in community health centers in underserved areas. The returns might be lower initially, but the impact would be significant. Good instinct. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Talk to Robert about it tomorrow. See if there's budget to pilot a program. Dad, I've been here less than a week. And you're already contributing valuable insights. Stop doubting yourself, Natalie. You belong in this world. She wanted to believe him. The work was fascinating, the team was respectful, and Julian clearly needed her partnership. But imposter syndrome was real, whispering that she was play-acting at being an executive, that any moment someone would realize she had no business sitting in those meetings. On Friday afternoon, Julian took her to visit one of their education initiatives, a charter school in the city's poorest neighborhood. Thornton Enterprises had funded the building, provided technology, and established scholarship programs for graduates. We're not just writing checks, Julian explained as they walked through bright classrooms filled with engaged students. We're providing mentorship, internship opportunities, career counseling. We want these kids to have real pathways to success. The principal, an energetic woman named Grace, showed them recent test scores and graduation rates. Your family's support has been transformative. These kids have opportunities they never would have had otherwise. Natalie watched students working on computers, collaborating on projects, receiving one-on-one tutoring. This was what the money meant. Not yachts or private jets or luxury goods, but real change in real lives. I want to do more of this, she told Julian on the drive back to headquarters. You will. Once you're officially on board, you can champion whatever initiatives resonate with you. Dad's always encouraged us to follow our passions within the company structure. That evening, Natalie returned to her apartment for the first time in a week. She'd been staying at the estate, but she needed to check on her small space, collect mail, and gain some perspective. The apartment felt tiny after days in the mansion. Her furniture looked shabby, her belongings sparse. But it was still hers, still the symbol of her independence. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hey Nat, it's Brandon. Can we talk? She stared at the message, a cold fury rising in her chest. 3 weeks since the divorce and now he wanted to talk? She blocked the number without responding. Another text came through from a different number. Please, I really need to speak with you. It's urgent. Things aren't going well. She blocked that one too. A third number. Natalie, please. I know you're angry, but I made a mistake. Can we at least meet for coffee? She powered off her phone entirely. Whatever crisis Brandon was experiencing, whatever regret he might be feeling, it was no longer her concern. She'd signed those papers. She'd walked away. And in walking away, she discovered a path back to something far more significant than their small marriage had ever been. She looked around the apartment one more time, then began packing her remaining belongings. This phase of her life was over. The experiment in ordinary living had served its purpose. Natalie Harper was done hiding. Natalie Thornton was ready to step into her full power. Brandon sat in his apartment, staring at his laptop screen in disbelief. Another rejection. That made 7 investors who'd passed on his tech startup in the past 2 weeks. 7 meetings where he'd presented his business plan, where he'd been polite and engaged, where the investors had seemed genuinely interested, only to receive polite rejection emails afterward. "I don't understand," he said to his business partner Trevor, who sat across from him looking equally frustrated. "The pitch is solid. The product has real market potential. What are we missing?" "I've been asking around," Trevor said carefully. "Talking to some contacts. There's a rumor circulating." "What rumor?" "That we're being blacklisted. That someone with serious influence has put out word that backing us is a bad idea." Brandon laughed, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "That's paranoid. Who would do that?" "I don't know, man. But something's going on. We had 3 solid investors ready to commit, and they all backed out within 48 hours of each other. That's not coincidence." Brandon's phone rang. His mother. He considered not answering, but Patricia had been calling repeatedly for days, and ignoring her only made things worse. "Mom? Finally. I've been trying to reach you for 3 days." Her voice was sharp with stress. "We need to talk. In person. Can you come to the store?" "What's wrong?" "Everything's wrong. Just come." He drove to his mother's boutique, a small shop in a trendy neighborhood that sold overpriced clothing to wealthy women with nothing better to do than spend their husband's money. Patricia had opened it 5 years ago with money from her divorce settlement, and it had been modestly successful, though Brandon suspected she barely broke even most months. The moment he walked in, he could see something was different. Half the racks were empty. Sale signs covered the windows. Patricia stood behind the counter looking 10 years older than she had a month ago. "What happened?" Brandon asked. "The building's been sold," Patricia said flatly. "New owner declined to renew my lease. I have 30 days to vacate. Can't you find another space?" "With what money?" "I've been struggling for months. The rent increase last year nearly broke me, and sales have been down since that new boutique opened 3 blocks over. I was barely hanging on, and now this." She gestured around the half-empty store. "I'm liquidating everything. After I pay off my suppliers and settle the lease, I'll have maybe $20,000 left. 15 years of work gone." Brandon felt the news like a physical blow. His family's financial stability had always been shaky, more performance than reality, but he'd counted on his mother's store as a backup option if his startup failed. Now that safety net was gone. "Who bought the building?" "Some investment firm. I tried to negotiate with them, but they wouldn't even meet with me. Just sent papers through their lawyers saying the lease wouldn't be renewed. They're bringing in a national chain, something with deeper pockets and better credit." Candace appeared from the back room, arms full of clothing. "This is all because you divorced Natalie," she said, shooting Brandon an accusatory look. "Bad karma catching up to you." "That's ridiculous," Brandon snapped. "My divorce has nothing to do with Mom's lease." "Doesn't it? Everything started falling apart right after you humiliated her. Maybe the universe is paying you back." "Candace, stop," Patricia said wearily. "Karma isn't real. This is just bad luck and bad timing." But Brandon felt a creeping unease. The startup rejections, his mother's lease, even Amber had been acting strange lately. She'd canceled their last 3 dates, claiming work obligations. When they did talk, she seemed distracted, always checking her phone, making excuses to leave early. He tried calling Natalie multiple times, swallowing his pride to ask if she'd consider helping his mother with a loan. Just temporarily until Patricia got back on her feet. But Natalie had blocked his number. All 3 of his numbers. He'd even tried emailing, but those messages bounced back undelivered. "I'll figure something out," Brandon told his mother, trying to sound confident. "Maybe I can get a business loan, help you relocate." Patricia just looked at him sadly. "Sweetie, you're broke. Your startup has no funding. You're living off credit cards and the last of your student loan money. You can't save me." "I appreciate the thought, but I'm on my own." The words stung because they were true. Brandon had been so certain his business would take off, so confident that investors would recognize his brilliant idea and throw money at him. Instead, he was watching his dreams crumble in real time. That evening, he met Amber at an expensive restaurant she'd chosen. She arrived 15 minutes late, wearing a new dress he didn't recognize and carrying a designer purse he definitely couldn't afford to buy her. "Sorry," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Work ran late." "You've been saying that a lot lately." "Because it's been true. We're launching a new campaign and I'm leading the team. It's intense." Brandon wanted to feel happy for her success, but instead, he felt resentful. Everything in Amber's life seemed to be going well while his world collapsed. They ordered, made small talk, but the ease they'd had in the early days of their relationship was gone. Amber kept checking her phone. Brandon kept thinking about his mother's boutique, his failed startup, his blocked attempts to contact Natalie. "I need to talk to you about something," Amber said when their entrees arrived. Here it comes, Brandon thought. He'd been expecting this conversation, dreading it but also not surprised. "I think we should take a break," Amber continued. "Just for a little while. You're going through a lot right now and I think you need space to figure things out without the pressure of a relationship." "You're breaking up with me," Brandon said flatly. "I'm suggesting we take a break." "That's different." "It's not different at all. You're ending this because my startup's failing and I'm not the promising entrepreneur you thought I was." Amber had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? Be honest, Amber. You were attracted to my potential. The idea of being with someone successful. Now that things aren't going according to plan, you're out." "You're oversimplifying." "Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, you're doing exactly what I did to Natalie. Trading down when the relationship stops serving your ambitions." The comparison hit both of them hard. Amber's face flushed. "That's completely different." "How?" "Because you and Natalie were married. You made vows. We're just dating. So that makes it okay to bail when things get difficult?" "I'm not having this conversation." Amber stood, grabbing her purse. "Call me when you're ready to be mature about this." She walked out, leaving Brandon sitting alone with 2 entrees and a check he could barely afford. He paid with a credit card that was dangerously close to maxed out and sat in his car afterward, replaying the evening in his head. 6 weeks ago he'd been confident and optimistic. He'd dumped the wife who'd been holding him back, started a relationship with someone who understood his ambitions, and launched a business he believed would make him wealthy. He'd felt like he was finally becoming the man he was meant to be. Now he was alone, broke, and watching opportunities evaporate around him. His phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. Another investor just pulled out. They said they're pursuing other opportunities. "I don't know what to tell you, man. Something is seriously wrong." Brandon drove home in a daze. His apartment, which had seemed spacious and modern when he'd moved in after the divorce, now felt empty and cold. Natalie's presence lingered in strange ways, in the bare spots where her furniture had been, in the kitchen she'd organized, in the closet that still smelled faintly of her perfume. He'd been so sure he was making the right choice. Natalie had been fine, perfectly nice, but she'd lacked the ambition and sophistication he'd wanted in a partner. She'd been content with her retail jobs and small dreams, while he'd wanted more, needed more. He'd thought Amber was that more. He'd thought dumping Natalie would open up his future, remove the anchor dragging down his potential. Instead he'd lost everything. And the universe, or karma, or whatever force governed such things, seemed to be laughing at him. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom glittered with wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over tables of wealthy donors, business leaders and politicians. This was the annual Humanitarian Excellence Gala, the most prestigious charity event in the city, where millions were raised for various causes and powerful people made connections that would shape the next year's business landscape. Brandon stood near the bar, nursing an overpriced drink he couldn't really afford. He'd bought the ticket on his last functioning credit card, a desperate gamble that he might network his way into new investor interest. His suit was 3 years old, cleaned and pressed to look presentable, but he felt shabby compared to the tailored elegance surrounding him. "Brandon?" A familiar voice made him turn. Trevor approached, looking equally uncomfortable in a borrowed tuxedo. "I didn't think you'd actually come. I need to be here. Someone in this room might give us a chance if I can just talk to them face to face. Man, I think it's time to accept that this startup isn't happening. We've exhausted every option." "Not every option. Not yet." The lights dimmed, and a voice over the sound system asked everyone to take their seats for the evening's program. Brandon and Trevor found their assigned table near the back of the room, seated with other low-level attendees who'd bought individual tickets rather than corporate tables. The evening's host, a well-known local news anchor, took the stage to welcome everyone and introduce the night's keynote speaker and primary donor. "Our benefactor this evening," the host said, "has chosen to step out of the shadows and publicly embrace her role in our community's philanthropic efforts. She represents the next generation of conscious capitalism, using her resources to create meaningful change in education, healthcare, and environmental conservation. Please welcome the woman whose generosity has made tonight possible. Natalie Thornton, heiress to the Thornton Enterprises fortune and newly appointed co-chair of the Thornton Foundation." The room erupted in applause as a spotlight illuminated the center of the stage. Brandon's drink slipped from his suddenly numb fingers, ice scattering across the table. Natalie walked onto the stage wearing a stunning blue gown, her hair swept up elegantly, diamond earrings catching the light. She looked regal, confident, nothing like the woman he'd watched sign divorce papers in jeans and a simple sweater 6 weeks ago. "Thank you all for being here," Natalie said into the microphone, her voice steady and warm. "I'm honored to continue my family's tradition of supporting causes that create lasting positive change in our community." She spoke for 10 minutes about the evening's charitable focus, about the Thornton Foundation's mission, about her vision for expanding their impact. She was articulate, poised, commanding the room's attention effortlessly. Brandon couldn't process what he was seeing. Natalie Thornton. The name echoed in his head. Thornton Enterprises. The Thornton Foundation. The trillionaire family that stayed out of the public eye, that controlled vast portions of the city's real estate and technology sectors, that had financed the hospital wing where his mother had gotten her appendix removed and the scholarship program that had helped pay for his business school. Trevor leaned over, his face pale. "Is that your ex-wife?" "I think so," Brandon managed. "I mean, yes. That's Natalie. But she never said, she never mentioned." "She's a Thornton? As in the Thorntons?" Trevor's voice rose slightly before he controlled it. "How did you not know?" "She said her family was distant. She used a different last name. Harper. She worked retail for crying out loud. She drove a 15-year-old car." Around them, other people were noticing Brandon's reaction, following his gaze to the stage. Whispers started spreading. "Isn't that Brandon Peterson? The guy who dumped her? I heard his family mocked her at the divorce signing." The whispers grew louder as Natalie finished her speech and the program continued with a video presentation about the foundation's work. Brandon sat frozen, watching images of schools, hospitals, and community centers that bore the Thornton name. Every third building in the city seemed to have been funded by them. During the video, Natalie descended from the stage and made her way through the room, stopping at tables to thank major donors. She was accompanied by a young man who looked remarkably like her, presumably a family member, and a small security detail that kept a discreet distance. She was heading in his direction. Brandon's heart hammered. Should he stay seated? Should he leave? Should he try to approach her? Natalie reached his table. Her eyes swept over the occupants and landed on him. For a moment, her expression was unreadable. Then she smiled, cool and polite. "Brandon, what a surprise to see you here." Everyone at the table was staring now, the tension palpable. "Natalie," he managed, "I didn't know. About your family, about who you were. I know you didn't." Her tone was pleasant but distant, the way you might address a stranger. "I hope you're enjoying the evening. Can we talk, please? Privately? I'm afraid my schedule is quite full tonight. Perhaps another time." She started to turn away. "Natalie, please. I made a mistake. A huge mistake. If I had known." She turned back and now her eyes were ice. "If you had known I was wealthy, you mean? If you had known I could have funded your startup or introduced you to investors or bought your mother's boutique?" The directness of it struck him silent. "That's what you mean, isn't it?" Natalie continued, her voice low enough that only their table could hear. "You're not sorry you treated me poorly. You're sorry you missed out on my money. That's not fair. Isn't it?" She studied him like he was a specimen under glass. "You signed divorce papers with a smile on your face, Brandon. Your mother called me worthless. Your sister filmed my humiliation for her social media. And your girlfriend sat beside you, gloating. None of you cared about me as a person. You only cared that I wasn't elevating your social status. I was wrong. I see that now. You see my net worth now. That's what you see." She glanced at Trevor. "I assume this is your business partner? The one who's been trying to get funding for your tech startup." Trevor looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "Here's what I see," Natalie said. I see two men who are struggling because they made poor choices and are now facing consequences. I see people who valued potential over character and are learning that potential without integrity is meaningless. Are you the one blocking our investors? Brandon asked, the suspicion that had been growing in his mind finally crystallizing into accusation. Natalie's smile didn't waver. I don't need to block anything. The investment community is small, Brandon. Word gets around about people who lack character, who treat others poorly, who can't be trusted to honor their commitments. You did this to yourself. You're ruining my life out of spite. I'm not doing anything. Your life is ruining itself. I'm simply living mine. She nodded politely to the rest of the table. Enjoy your evening, everyone. She walked away, the young man who accompanied her shooting Brandon a withering look before following. The table erupted in barely contained whispers the moment she was out of earshot. Brandon sat in shock, his mind racing through every conversation, every assumption, every moment of the past 8 years. Natalie had been wealthy the entire time. Trillionaire wealthy. She'd chosen to live modestly, to work retail, to drive an old car. She'd chosen him, chosen their life together, chosen simplicity over luxury. And he'd thrown it away. He'd mocked her, divorced her, replaced her with someone he'd thought was better. The magnitude of his mistake was crushing. Trevor stood abruptly. I need to leave. Trevor? No. I'm done. This startup was dead the moment you humiliated that woman. I'm not going down with your ship. He left. Around the ballroom, people were still staring at Brandon, whispering. He recognized some of them, business contacts he'd met through school, investors he'd pitched to. They all knew now. They all understood what he'd done. Brandon stood on shaky legs and made his way to the exit, desperate to escape the weight of hundreds of judging eyes. Outside, he leaned against the building, breathing hard. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. I just got a call from the building's new owner. They're willing to negotiate a new lease at double the current rate. I can't afford it. This is your fault. This is all your fault. Another text from Candace. Thanks a lot. The video I posted of the divorce has gone viral, but not the way I wanted. People are calling me cruel. I'm losing followers. You ruined everything. Brandon slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold concrete. 6 weeks ago, he'd had a wife, a startup dream, a supportive family, and a girlfriend. He'd had potential and confidence. Now he had nothing but the crushing knowledge that he'd destroyed the best thing in his life because he'd been too blind to see its value. And Natalie Thornton, the woman he'd called ordinary, was inside that ballroom, changing the world with resources he'd never imagined she possessed. 3 days after the gala, Brandon received a formal letter delivered by courier to his apartment. The return address was Thornton Legal Services. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a notice that the building housing his apartment had been purchased by Meridian Property Holdings, a subsidiary of Thornton Enterprises. His lease would not be renewed when it expired in 60 days. Alternative housing suggestions were provided, all in neighborhoods he couldn't afford. He researched Meridian Property Holdings. The company had purchased 17 properties in the past month, all of them strategically located throughout the city. They were redeveloping some, renovating others, and systematically not renewing leases for tenants who didn't meet certain criteria. Brandon didn't need to guess which criterion he'd failed. That same day his mother called. The boutique closing is next Friday. I'm moving in with your aunt in Ohio. I can't afford to stay in the city anymore. Mom, I'm so sorry. Don't. Just don't. I should never have encouraged you to leave Natalie. I was so focused on you marrying up, that I couldn't see you'd already found someone solid. Someone real. Patricia's voice cracked. I destroyed my own son's marriage because I was a snob, and now I'm paying for it. It's not your fault. I made the choice to divorce her. I pressured you. I made you feel like she wasn't good enough. And the whole time she was more than we could ever be. She laughed bitterly. The universe has a sense of humor, doesn't it? We mocked her for being poor, and she was secretly a trillionaire. After they hung up, Brandon searched for information about Natalie online. The gala had changed her public profile significantly. Articles appeared about her return to the Thornton family, about her plans for expanding the foundation's work, about her vision for ethical business practices. Photos from the gala showed her looking radiant, confident, surrounded by people who genuinely seemed to respect her. In one picture, she was laughing at something the man beside her had said, her hand on his arm in an easy, comfortable gesture. Thomas Wright, the caption identified him. Director of the Urban Education Initiative, a nonprofit funded by the Thornton Foundation. Brandon zoomed in on Thomas's face. He was handsome in an understated way, wearing glasses and a genuine smile. He looked at Natalie like she was precious, like she mattered. The way Brandon should have looked at her. His phone rang. Unknown number, but he answered it anyway. Mr. Peterson? This is James Chin from Thornton Enterprises Corporate Communications. I'm calling to inform you that a story will be running in tomorrow's business section about Miss Thornton's return to the family business. Your name will be mentioned in context of her past marriage. We wanted to give you advance notice as a courtesy. What will the article say? Simply the facts. That you were married for 5 years, that you divorced recently, and that Miss Thornton is now focused on her work with the foundation and company operations. We've worked with the journalist to ensure the piece is respectful and factual. So it won't mention how I treated her? How my family acted. Pause. The article focuses on Miss Thornton's professional accomplishments, not her personal history. However, I can't control what other media outlets might choose to report once the story is public. The message was clear. Thornton Enterprises would be classy about this, but the truth would get out anyway. The internet never forgot, and Candace's video was already making rounds on social media with increasingly harsh commentary. Is there anything I can do? Brandon asked, hating how desperate he sounded. Any way to make this right? That's not really my area, Mr. Peterson. I'm just providing courtesy notice. Have a good day. The call ended. The next morning, the article appeared exactly as described. Professional, factual, highlighting Natalie's education, her years working in retail, her decision to reconnect with her family. Brandon was mentioned in one paragraph. Thornton was previously married to Brandon Peterson, an aspiring entrepreneur. The couple divorced recently, and Thornton has since focused her energy on philanthropic initiatives and corporate strategy. But the article's comments section was brutal. Someone had linked Candace's video. Hundreds of people weighed in, calling Brandon and his family cruel, opportunistic, shallow. Screenshots of Patricia's Instagram posts mocking Natalie's clothes and job appeared. Someone had dug up Amber's social media posts about finally dating someone with ambition. The court of public opinion had decided Brandon was a villain, and there was no appealing the verdict. His LinkedIn profile, once filled with endorsements and connections, became toxic. People removed their recommendations. Connection requests went unanswered. The few remaining business contacts, he had stopped returning his calls. Trevor officially dissolved their partnership, sending a formal email. Given recent circumstances and the impossibility of securing funding, I'm pursuing other opportunities. I wish you the best, but I can't afford to be associated with this situation any longer. Brandon spent the next week applying for jobs, any jobs. But his resume now carried the stain of public disgrace. Employers Googled his name and found the stories, the videos, the commentary. Interview calls that had been scheduled got mysteriously canceled. 2 weeks after the gala, he ran into Amber at a coffee shop. She was with someone new, a man in an expensive suit who looked successful and confident. They were laughing together, clearly comfortable. She saw Brandon and her smile faltered. Oh, hi. Amber. This is Christopher. Christopher, this is Brandon, my ex. Christopher shook his hand with barely concealed pity. Nice to meet you. You moved on quickly, Brandon said to Amber. I moved on to someone who has his life together, Amber replied, not unkindly. You and I wanted different things, Brandon. You wanted success without doing the work. I wanted a partner who was already successful. We were both chasing the wrong things. And Christopher is the right thing? He's employed, stable, and kind. That's more than enough. They left together, Amber's hand in Christopher's, and Brandon stood alone with his overpriced coffee, watching through the window as they walked away. His phone buzzed. Another text from his mother. The movers came today. I'm leaving tomorrow. Take care of yourself, sweetheart. I love you, but I can't help you anymore. You need to figure out how to rebuild without dragging me down too. That night, Brandon sat in his nearly empty apartment, most of his furniture already sold to pay bills. He'd found a new place, a studio in a rough neighborhood, all he could afford on the temporary job he'd finally landed at a warehouse. The work was physical, exhausting, humbling. He pulled out his laptop and opened a blank document. He'd been thinking about this for days, wrestling with pride and shame. Finally, he started typing. Dear Natalie, I know you'll probably never read this and I don't blame you. I'm writing it anyway because I need to say things I should have said years ago. You were right about everything. I did value your potential worth over your actual character. I did treat you as less than you deserved. I allowed my family to mock you and my girlfriend to humiliate you because I was too weak to stand up for what was right. I thought I was leaving you behind to find something better. Instead, I lost the best thing I ever had. Not because of your money, I genuinely didn't know about that, but because of who you are. You were kind when I was critical. You were supportive when I was dismissive. You worked hard while I dreamed empty dreams. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now, too late, what I threw away. I hope you're happy. I hope Thomas or whoever you end up with appreciates you the way I failed to. I hope the work you're doing with the foundation brings you fulfillment. And I hope that somewhere in your incredible new life, there's a small sense of satisfaction knowing that the people who treated you poorly are now paying the price for their cruelty. Not because you orchestrated it, I don't think you did, but because karma is real and we got exactly what we deserved. I'm sorry. For all of it. Brandon. He read it over 3 times, then saved it to his desktop. He wouldn't send it. She'd blocked him, and trying to reach her again would be harassment. But writing it helped, clarified his thoughts, forced him to confront his own mistakes. He closed the laptop and looked around his bare apartment. This was his life now. Humble, difficult, a daily struggle. Ironically, it was probably similar to the life Natalie had lived for 8 years, the life she'd chosen voluntarily while he'd mocked her for it. The difference was that she'd had character and purpose. She'd been building something real inside herself, developing the strength and wisdom she'd need when she stepped back into her family's world. Brandon had been building nothing. Just ego and empty ambition. He had 60 days until his lease ended. 60 days to find a way forward, to figure out how to rebuild from the ashes of his own terrible choices. The gala had been his revelation. Now came his reckoning. And it was going to take a very long time to climb back up from the bottom he'd created for himself. 6 months had passed since the gala. Natalie stood in the Thornton Foundation's new community center, watching children participate in an after-school program she'd helped design. The center offered tutoring, art classes, sports programs, and meal services for families in need. It was the 3rd one they'd opened in 6 months, with 5 more planned for the coming year. They love it, Julian said, standing beside her. We've already got a waiting list for enrollment. Then we need to expand faster, Natalie replied. No child should be on a waiting list for education support. Spoken like a true Thornton. He smiled. Dad would be proud. Their father had died 3 months ago, peacefully in his sleep at the estate. His memorial service had drawn hundreds of people. Business leaders, philanthropists, employees, and recipients of the foundation's support. Natalie had given the eulogy, speaking about responsibility, legacy, and the obligation of wealth to serve rather than simply accumulate. She'd cried during the speech, but they'd been tears of gratitude as much as grief. Gerald had given her these final months with him, teaching her everything he knew about running the empire he'd built. He'd been sharp until the end, challenging her thinking, pushing her to be bolder in her vision. You're ready, he told her 2 days before he died. You and Julian both. You'll do things I never imagined, and that's exactly how it should be. Now she and Julian ran Thornton Enterprises together, making decisions that affected thousands of lives, steering billions of dollars toward projects they believed would create lasting positive change. It was overwhelming sometimes, but Natalie had discovered she was good at it. The years working retail had taught her about people, about struggles, about what mattered in everyday life. That perspective made her a better executive than someone who'd only ever known wealth. Thomas is here, Julian said, nodding toward the entrance. Natalie turned and smiled as Thomas Wright entered the community center, carrying a box of books for the library they were establishing. He'd been a constant presence in her life since the gala, their friendship deepening into something more meaningful over shared work and shared values. Special delivery, Thomas said, setting down the box. Donated from that author you met last month. She sent over 50 copies of her books for the kids. That's incredibly generous. Natalie helped him unpack the books, arranging them on the shelves. Thomas watched her work, affection clear in his eyes. You have that look again. What look? The one you get when you're plotting something. What new project is forming in that brilliant mind? I'm thinking we need a mobile version of these centers. Something that can bring services directly to rural communities that don't have the population density to support a full building. Mobile community centers. I love it. Thomas pulled out his phone to make notes. We could outfit buses with computers, books, basic medical screening equipment. Rotate them through underserved areas on a set schedule. This was what Natalie loved about Thomas. He didn't see her wealth first. He saw her ideas, her passion, her commitment to making things better. He'd known her as Natalie Thornton from the beginning, but he'd fallen for her because of who she was, not what she had. They'd been dating officially for 2 months, taking things slowly, building something solid. Thomas had proposed the week after her father's funeral, simple and sincere in her favorite garden at the estate. "I love you," he'd said. "Not the Thornton heiress or the foundation chair or the businesswoman, though I admire all of those things. I love you. The woman who remembers everyone's name, who cries during children's book readings, who works harder than anyone I've ever met because she genuinely wants the world to be better. Marry me, please." She'd said yes. The engagement ring was modest by Thornton standards, a simple sapphire Thomas had saved for, and Natalie loved it more than any diamond could compare. It represented him choosing her, not her money or influence, just her. They were planning a small wedding, immediate family and close friends only. No media circus, no society pageant, just a meaningful ceremony focused on commitment and love. "You're doing it again," Thomas said, interrupting her thoughts. "Doing what?" "That little smile you get when you're thinking about us." He kissed her forehead. "I love that smile." Julian cleared his throat. "I'm still here, you too." They laughed, and Natalie felt a surge of contentment. This was her life now. Work that mattered, love that was real, family that supported her. It was everything she'd hoped for when she'd left the estate 8 years ago, but it had taken a painful journey to get here. "I need to head back to headquarters," Julian said, checking his watch. "The Tokyo office is calling in 15 minutes about the new tech acquisitions." "You staying here?" "For another hour. I want to see the evening program start." "Tell Thomas the first said hi." Julian left with a wave. Natalie and Thomas spent the next hour with the children, reading books, helping with homework, playing basketball in the small gym. This hands-on work was Natalie's favorite part of her role. The high-level strategy meetings and financial decisions were important, but this was where she saw the actual impact. As they were leaving, Natalie's phone rang. Her assistant Sophie. "What's up?" "I have an unusual request," Sophie said carefully. "Brandon Peterson's attorney called. He wants to know if you'd be willing to meet with his client. He says Mr. Peterson has something he'd like to say to you in person." Natalie's stomach tightened. She hadn't thought about Brandon much in recent months, too busy with work and her new life with Thomas. The few times his name had come up, it had been in passing, someone mentioning they'd heard he was working warehouse jobs and living in a difficult neighborhood. "Why would I want to meet with him?" Natalie asked. "The attorney says Mr. Peterson isn't looking for anything from you. No money, no help, no favors. He just wants an opportunity to apologize properly. He can apologize in writing." That's what I told him. But apparently Mr. Peterson has written several letters and thrown them all away. He feels he needs to say this in person, even if you don't accept the apology. Thomas watched her face, reading her emotions. "Who is it?" he mouthed. "Brandon," she mouthed back. His expression darkened slightly, but he waited for her to make her own decision. "Tell him no," Natalie said finally. "I appreciate that he wants to apologize, but I'm not interested in reopening that chapter of my life. If he needs to say something, he can write it down and send it through his attorney. I'll read it. That's the best I can offer." "Understood. I'll relay the message." After hanging up, Natalie felt unsettled. Thomas took her hand. "You okay?" "I think so. It's strange. I spent 5 years with him and now he's just a stranger who hurt me once. I don't feel angry anymore. I don't feel anything really." "That's probably healthy." "Is it? Or is it cold?" "It's self-protection. You don't owe him your time or attention, Natalie. He made his choices and now he's living with the consequences. You showing up to listen to his apology won't change anything for either of you." "You're right." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for being rational when I'm feeling wobbly. That's what partners do. You be rational when I'm wobbly, I'll be rational when you are." They drove back to the estate together, where Natalie had been living full-time since her father's death. The place felt less empty now, with Julian there and Thomas visiting frequently. They were making it a home again, slowly filling it with warmth and life. That evening, Natalie sat in her father's old office, now hers, reviewing proposals for the next quarter's foundation initiatives. Her desk was covered with requests for funding, each one representing people who needed help, communities that could benefit from support. She couldn't say yes to everything, but she could say yes to a lot. That was the blessing and burden of her position. A notification appeared on her computer. An email forwarded by Sophie, marked "Per your request re, B. Peterson." Natalie opened it. The email was from Brandon's attorney with an attached letter. She hesitated, then opened the attachment. The letter was short, handwritten and scanned. "Natalie, I won't waste your time with lengthy explanations or excuses. I just need you to know that I understand now what I was too blind to see then. You were always more than enough. More than I deserved, more than I appreciated, more than I understood. I'm sorry for every moment I made you feel small. I'm sorry for every criticism, every comparison, every time I chose my ego over your feelings. I'm sorry I let my family treat you poorly, and I'm sorry I replaced you with someone I thought was better, only to learn you were irreplaceable. I know you've moved on. I know you're doing incredible work and living an incredible life. I'm genuinely glad for you, even though I have no right to be part of it anymore. This isn't about getting you back or asking for forgiveness. This is just me acknowledging the truth, taking responsibility, and wishing you all the happiness I failed to give you. Be well, Brandon. Natalie read it twice, then closed the file. She felt a tiny release, a final letting go of hurt she hadn't realized she was still carrying. Brandon had finally grown up. Too late for them, but maybe not too late for him. She deleted the email and turned back to her work. Foundation proposals needed reviewing. The mobile community center idea needed development. Her wedding needed planning. The past was the past. She'd acknowledged it, learned from it, and moved forward. Now the future was all that mattered. And her future was bright. 1 year after her father's death, Natalie stood at the podium in the new Gerald Thornton Memorial Hall, addressing an audience of foundation donors, community leaders, and scholarship recipients. The hall was part of the largest community center they'd opened yet, serving 3 neighborhoods and providing comprehensive services from early childhood education to senior care. My father believed that wealth was a trust, not a treasure, Natalie said, her voice clear and confident. He believed that those of us fortunate enough to have resources had an obligation to use them wisely, ethically, and with deep consideration for impact. Today, as we open this center in his name, we continue that legacy. She paused, looking out at the faces in the audience. Julian sat in the front row beside Thomas, both men supporting her as they always did. Her friends from the foundation board, colleagues from Thornton Enterprises, and staff members she'd come to know and respect all filled the hall. But I want to talk today about something my father taught me through his life, not just his words. The importance of second chances being earned, not demanded. Throughout his career, my father was known for giving opportunities to people others had written off. He hired individuals with criminal records, invested in startups led by marginalized founders, and supported communities that mainstream capital ignored. She clicked to the next slide, showing statistics about the foundation's impact over the past year. But he didn't just give handouts. He gave chances. And there's a crucial difference. A handout asks for nothing in return. A chance asks for effort, commitment, and growth. My father believed that people who had made mistakes deserved opportunities to prove they could do better, but he also believed they had to do the work of becoming better. He didn't rescue people from consequences. He provided pathways for them to rescue themselves. Brandon sat in the back row, having received an invitation he'd almost thrown away, certain it was a mistake. But the invitation had been deliberate, as he'd learned from the note attached. You're invited not as my former spouse, but as someone who spent the past year working 2 jobs while volunteering at youth centers on weekends. That kind of commitment deserves recognition. Come if you'd like. No obligation. Natalie. He'd debated for a week before deciding to attend. Now he sat listening to her speak, marveling at her transformation. She was radiant, authoritative, every inch the leader she'd been born to be. The woman he'd divorced barely resembled the woman at that podium, not because she'd changed but because she'd finally stopped hiding. This center represents our commitment to that philosophy, Natalie continued. We're providing resources, but we're asking for participation. We're offering support, but we're expecting effort. Because real change doesn't happen when we simply give people things. Real change happens when we empower people to build things for themselves. The audience applauded, and Natalie smiled. I want to share a personal story. 8 years ago, I walked away from my family's wealth because I needed to understand who I was without it. I worked retail, lived in small apartments, struggled to pay bills. Some people thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. But those years taught me something crucial, that dignity doesn't come from what you have, but from what you do with what you have. She paused, her eyes finding Brandon in the back row for just a moment. I learned that people who work hard deserve respect, regardless of their job title. I learned that kindness matters more than status. I learned that real value is measured in character, not currency. And when I came back to this world of wealth and influence, I brought those lessons with me. They guide every decision I make, every initiative I support, every relationship I build. Thomas stood and began clapping, and the entire audience rose with him in a standing ovation. Natalie let it wash over her, grateful and humbled. After the ceremony, she mingled with guests, shaking hands, thanking donors, and listening to stories from community members about how the center would help their families. Julian worked the room too, his natural charm making connections that would serve the foundation for years to come. Thomas appeared at her elbow with champagne. "You were magnificent." "I was adequate," Natalie corrected, but she was smiling. "You were magnificent, and I won't hear otherwise. Also, there's someone who'd like to speak with you if you're willing. No pressure if you'd rather not." She followed his gaze and saw Brandon standing awkwardly near the door, clearly preparing to leave. "Give me a minute," she told Thomas. She made her way across the room. Brandon saw her coming and froze. "You came?" Natalie said when she reached him. "I almost didn't. I wasn't sure if the invitation was real or some kind of test." "It was real. I heard about the work you've been doing with the youth centers. Teaching kids basic business and financial literacy. That's good work. It's the least I can do. After everything, I needed to figure out how to be useful instead of just ambitious." He looked down at his shoes, then back up at her. "You were right. About all of it. I valued the wrong things, hurt the right people, and ended up with nothing but consequences." "You ended up with clarity," Natalie corrected gently. "That's not nothing." "Maybe. I'm still figuring things out. Working warehouses to pay rent, volunteering on weekends, trying to become someone I'm not ashamed of. It's harder than I thought it would be. Good things usually are." She studied him. He looked older, thinner, with an exhaustion in his eyes that spoke of genuine struggle. But there was also something new, humility. The arrogance she'd watched grow during their marriage was gone, replaced by a quiet awareness of his own limitations. "I don't want anything from you," Brandon said quickly. "I'm not here to ask for help or forgiveness or anything. I just wanted to thank you for inviting me and to say that I'm glad you're doing well. You deserve every bit of success you've found." "Thank you for saying that. I mean it. I was an idiot, Natalie. I had someone extraordinary and I couldn't see it because I was too busy looking for something flashy. I've spent this past year learning what extraordinary actually means, and it's not what I thought." "What do you think it means now?" "Showing up. Being consistent. Treating people with respect regardless of what they can do for you. Making choices based on character rather than convenience." He shrugged. "Basic stuff that I had to lose everything to understand. Those are good lessons. Hard one but good." "Are you happy?" Brandon asked suddenly. "Genuinely happy?" Natalie glanced back at Thomas, who was laughing with Julian and some foundation board members. "I am. I'm doing work that matters with people I love. I'm building something real. So yes, I'm happy." "Good. That's good." Brandon held out his hand. "I should go. Thank you again for the invitation. And congratulations on everything you've accomplished." She shook his hand, noting the calluses that hadn't been there during their marriage. "Working hands now. Hands that did real labor. Take care of yourself, Brandon. Keep doing the good work with the kids. That matters more than you probably realize." He nodded and left, disappearing into the evening crowd. Thomas materialized beside her. "How was that?" "Closure," Natalie said simply. "He's figuring things out. He's doing the work. I hope he succeeds." "You're generous. I'm practical. Holding grudges takes energy I'd rather spend elsewhere." She took his hand. "Come on. Julian wants to introduce us to some donors who are interested in the mobile center project." The evening continued, full of conversation, planning, and connection. At midnight, Natalie and Thomas drove back to the estate, exhausted but satisfied. 6 more months until the wedding," Thomas said as they pulled through the gates. "Are you having second thoughts yet?" "Not even close." "You?" "Not a chance. I can't wait to marry you, Natalie Thornton." "Natalie Wright," she corrected. "I'm taking your name." "You don't have to do that. Thornton is a legacy. And it will stay my legacy in business. But in my personal life, I want to be Natalie Wright. New chapter, new name, new beginning." He pulled into the circular drive and turned off the engine, then leaned over to kiss her. "I love you. I love you too." Inside, the estate was quiet, the staff long since gone for the evening. Natalie and Thomas walked through the halls hand in hand, turning off lights as they went. "Do you ever think about what your life would be like if you'd never left?" Thomas asked. "If you'd stayed here 8 years ago?" "Sometimes. I probably would have married someone from the right family, done charity work without understanding what it meant, lived a perfectly comfortable and perfectly empty life." "No regrets about the path you took?" "None. Not even Brandon." That marriage taught me what I didn't want, which helped me recognize what I did want when you came along. She squeezed his hand. Everything that happened led me here. To this work, to Julian, to you. I wouldn't change any of it. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, where Natalie's suite took up the entire east wing. It was the master suite now, refurnished and redecorated to be less formal, more lived in. Photos of her and Thomas, of her and Julian, of her parents when they were young, created a personal gallery along one wall. One more thing to tell you, Thomas said as they got ready for bed. The nonprofit got approved for our expansion grant. We're opening 3 new locations next year. Thomas, that's incredible. She hugged him. I'm so proud of you. Couldn't have done it without the foundation's support. And your belief in the work. You're doing it because it matters. The foundation just makes it easier. They climbed into bed and Natalie felt the day's exhaustion finally catching up to her. Thomas wrapped his arms around her and she settled against his chest. My father used to say that success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you create that lasts beyond you, Natalie said quietly. I think I'm finally understanding what he meant. The money will outlast us, but the systems we build, the programs we establish, the lives we touch, those create ripples that go on forever. Heavy thoughts for midnight. Important thoughts. I want our children to understand this. I want them to know they're inheriting both resources and responsibility. Our children? Thomas smiled. We haven't talked about that yet. I'm talking about it now. Do you want kids? With you? Absolutely. How many are we thinking? 2. Maybe 3. Enough to keep each other company, not enough to overwhelm us. Sounds perfect. Although fair warning, I'm going to teach them to be idealistic do-gooders like their mother. And I'm going to teach them to be grounded and genuine like their father. Between the 2 of us, they'll be balanced. They talked for another hour, planning and dreaming, before finally falling asleep in each other's arms. 3 months later, Natalie married Thomas in the estate gardens on a perfect spring afternoon. 50 guests attended, people who knew and loved them for who they were, not what they represented. Julian officiated, reading from poems their mother had loved. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt, and exactly right. At the reception, Julian gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. To my sister, he said, raising his glass. Who left home to find herself and came back to find her purpose. Who chose love over ego, character over status, and who taught me that real strength is knowing when to walk away and when to step forward. Natalie, you're the best sister, the best partner, and the best leader I could ask for. And Thomas, you're either the bravest or the craziest person I know for marrying into this family, but I'm glad you did. To the newlyweds. To the newlyweds, everyone echoed. That night, as she and Thomas prepared to leave for their honeymoon, Natalie stood on the estate terrace looking out at the city lights. So much had changed in 2 years. She'd gone from invisible retail worker to public figure, from rejected divorcee to respected executive, from uncertain to confident. But the most important change was internal. She'd stopped hiding from who she was. She'd stopped making herself small to fit other people's expectations. She'd stopped apologizing for having resources and instead embraced the responsibility to use them well. Ready? Thomas called from inside. Ready? Natalie replied, turning away from the view. They drove away from the estate toward the airport, toward 2 weeks in New Zealand where no one would know them and they could simply be tourists in love. Behind them, the estate's lights glowed in the darkness. Ahead of them, a future filled with purpose, partnership, and possibility. Natalie had found what she'd been searching for all along. Not wealth or status or revenge, but wholeness. The knowledge that she was exactly who she was meant to be, living exactly the life she was meant to live. Everything else was just details. And the details finally were perfect.